Hey, what is up guys, I'm KBHD here, and this is the larger of the two brother Nexuses that came out this year, Nexus 6P. It's the successor to the Nexus 6, and the P apparently stands for premium, which I think is fitting. This is one of the most anticipated smartphones of the year before it came out, and after using it for nearly a month, I can say it has lived up to a lot of the hype, which is hard to do for a smartphone nowadays, and it's quickly become one of my favorite smartphones right now for a bunch of reasons. First of all, it is a big phone again. It's technically the successor to the huge Nexus 6, but 6P is a little more manageable with a slightly smaller 5.7-inch display and a thinner, flatter body. And more importantly, flat sides that actually kind of help you with the grip a lot. There's also three colors, graphite, aluminum, and frost. They're all the same feel in the hand, same texture, and I like the stealth graphite look personally a bit more. It sort of hides the visor look of the glass up top. But it is the most fingerprint magnety of any of them, so you might go with the white if you like the more traditional Nexus look, or you could rock a skin, which can also look super dope. I'll leave a link to this one below. But yeah, Nexus 6P has a super premium build, all metal all the way around, these chamfered edges, and a nice bit of weight to it, and it has these ridged power buttons next to the volume buttons, all of which are relatively clicky and decently tactile, and overall it's definitely fitting in the premium package with its industrial design and the material choices. It's top notch, which is always awesome to see in a Nexus. The hump on the back of the phone with the camera and the flash and the window for radios to pass through, it's really not all that bad, and it actually spans the whole width of the phone, kind of like the Droid X back in the day, so it still sits flat enough on a table to type without rocking. I personally don't mind it, and it actually kind of helps tell which side is up when grabbing the phone without looking. The only weird part of the build for me was the bottom back panel, which felt slightly more raised on one side than the other, like it kind of didn't quite fit on my review unit Nexus 6P, but my retail units were just fine. One of the coolest new pieces of hardware with the new Nexuses, or is it Nexi? I'm gonna go with Nexuses unless someone from Google corrects me. One of the coolest new pieces of Nexus hardware is the fingerprint reader on the back, dubbed Nexus Imprint. It's really good, and knowing how good some of Huawei's other fingerprint readers are, this shouldn't be much of a surprise, but the touch to unlock was really quick with this one, and I really got used to it being there on the back of the phone, right where my index finger rests, to the point where I'd reach into my pocket and grab the phone with an unlocking grip, and then it would just be ready to go before I even got it up to my face. So the unlock is just as fast as using the power button here, but obviously way more secure. The only real downside to it being on the back is if your phone's sitting on a table or something, you either have to use that pattern unlock or I guess pick up the phone to physically unlock it. A little less convenient, but I got used to it. Alright, so continuing with the theme of premium, up on the front of this guy you have a beautiful, crispy 5.7-inch Quad HD OLED display. This isn't a huge upgrade on paper. Nexus 6 had a Quad HD OLED display too, but this one is slightly better, slightly brighter, slightly less pink at low brightness, which is a nice improvement, slightly better viewing angles before it rainbows out, and slightly more accurate color. It still pops like an AMOLED should, but color accuracy is tight with this one. It's a latest generation Samsung panel, so it should be. I'd put this display right up near the top for any smartphone, short of the Galaxy Note 5, which seemed to get really bright. But overall, thumbs up for the screen on the Nexus 6P. Oh, and the wallpaper link is right below that like button. You're welcome. Now, you've probably already noticed that the display is flanked by a pair of front-facing stereo speakers. They're outstanding speakers. Really big, loud, crisp, full sound, easily comparable to like boom sound from an HTC One M9 or Moto X Pure speakers. I've said it before, this makes for an awesome music listening experience, awesome video watching, awesome gaming, awesome conference calls, awesome alarm clock. Everything sounds great coming from this phone, and that can't be overlooked. I love them. Now, this is still a really high-end phone in the specs department, as it should be for the price. So inside you're getting a Snapdragon 810 version 2.1 chip, the Adreno 430 GPU, 3 gigabytes of RAM, and either 32, 64, or if you're a baller, 128 gigabytes of storage. And these high-end specs paired with the latest version of Android 6.0 Marshmallow translates into a really smooth experience from top to bottom, front to back, inside out. Using this phone is awesome. It's extremely responsive and snappy, and it handles pretty much everything I throw at it like a champ. And look, I throw a lot at phones, especially when I'm testing them, so I notice when they hang up, or when they stutter, or when they start to slow down, or when they can't quite push all their pixels. And a month in, this Nexus very rarely hiccups over much of anything. The one thing it's hiccuped over the most is probably the camera app, which I'll get to in a second, but everything else, multitasking, opening and closing apps, web browsing, all that fun stuff, buttery. Gaming too has been great. I know there's been, the concern over the Snapdragon 810 chip, but I have no problems with them using it here because this phone only gets a little bit warm maybe sometimes. Now, the heat dispersion is great with the metal body, and performance has been consistent and clean and smooth. I have no complaints with that. So yeah, without any worries about performance, you're free to mess around in the newest version of Android without worries of anything hanging up. And Marshmallow has been pretty great so far. Right out the box, there are less pre-installed apps, so you have the option to install most of Google's stuff from the Play Store. And I've always been a fan of clean stock Android. A lot of it is for aesthetic reasons, but it's getting a lot of functionality improvements too. And this is the stuff that you'll see trickle down into other non-Nexus phones later down the road. Classic example, brand new Android 6.0 feature, Google Now on Tap. So you still have the Google Now cards, but Google Now on Tap is a sort of a next level of convenience to accessing quick information. Basically, it reads what's on your display, whatever's text, and then when you press and hold the home button after that animation and about 3 or 4 seconds of loading, it brings up some cards related to what's on the screen, linking you to more information about it. So for example, I'm on someone's tweet here, I hold home to see what's now on tap, give it a few seconds, and it recognizes the person who tweeted and the stuff that they tweeted about. So then I can go grab a link to go get more info. This can be useful in like a text conversation. Maybe someone mentions a restaurant on Now on Tap can bring you more info about it, show you a menu, give you a phone number to call and make a reservation. Or maybe someone mentions a movie and you want to see the channel trailer real quick. Just neat little things that can save you a bunch of taps if you know when to use it. But the thing is, it's really inconsistent right now. Sometimes I hold down and there's nothing on tap. Even when I was hoping to see something specific. And other times I actually tried Now on Tap twice with the exact same thing on my screen, and one time it gave me Interstellar and The Martian, and the next time it gave me Interstellar, The Martian, and Matt Damon. I'm not really sure why it got that the second time, not the first, but yeah, Now on Tap, you can definitely tell it's young, it's early, it has room to grow. I feel like it's in a year or two, it'll be much faster and much more consistent and useful as it evolves. Kind of reminds me of the early days of Google Now when it didn't have nearly as many cards. And yes, you can still access Google Now cards by holding down the home button and hitting the Google G at the bottom. It's always there, just one extra tap to get into it. I kind of miss just swiping up from the home button. But yeah, outside of that, there are plenty of other little new features here and there in Android 6.0. The new share card with your most frequent contacts up at the top. The new launcher with your most frequent apps during certain times of the day, also up at the top. The new permissions manager is also much more powerful. You can grant or remove any permissions from any app at the drop of a hat if you wanted to, which puts all the power in the user's hands there. And of course, the battery optimizations on an app-by-app basis as well. The battery life on the Nexus 6P has been pretty damn good. We all know it has a 3450 mAh battery, so even in such a thin form factor, a pretty sizable battery. But with a Quad HD display and all these high-end internals, you don't expect it to get the longest battery life ever. But it does pretty well. I've gotten somewhere between 3 3/4 to 4.5 hours of screen on time, which in my book is like an A minus, especially for a phone of this size. But it's not the screen on time that's so impressive about this phone, it's the standby time. One of the newest features in Android 6.0 Marshmallow is called Doze, which essentially is using the sensors to recognize when the phone is not being used. Sometimes it's face down on a table or it's in a bag or something for a while. So the phone will refresh things in the background more slowly, less often, to save battery. The result is these new phones barely sip any power in standby mode, which is awesome. You can forget to charge your phone with 50% at night and wake up the next day with 48%. And lighter days where you don't use the phone a lot, you can end the day with 30, sometimes 40 or more percent battery left, because you can see in the battery charts where it was dozing and saving a ton of power, which is pretty legit. On top of that, this is a phone with USB Type-C, as you probably saw in the unboxing, and it supports fast charging, so you can get something like 6 or 7 hours of use out of a quick 10-minute charge. No wireless charging here, which is a bit of a bummer for some people, but I always prefer quick charging if I have the choice. Now there's one last big change with these new Nexuses that a lot of people, including me, were curious about, and that's the camera. Nexus 6P is rocking a new 12 megapixel Sony sensor, no optical image stabilization, but an f2.0 aperture, laser autofocus, and a really large pixel size. Apparently this was a sensor originally designed for point and shoots, not smartphone cameras, so that's cool. Here's what's good with the camera. It's pretty solid, definitely way better than any Nexus camera in the past, although that's not a super high bar to clear. And you can double tap the power button from anywhere, including the lock screen, to launch the new Google Camera app, and it's overall quite fast to snap pictures, which gives you a certain confidence when shooting a photo that you're gonna get it. Also, I noticed it's a particularly wide-angle lens on the back-facing camera. And the photos themselves look quite nice. There's a full-size photo gallery on mkbhd.com linked below if you want to check out those full-size images. But here on YouTube, you can see you're getting pretty sharp photos, plenty of detail in those 12 megapixels, not too saturated, but nice color, and overall pretty good looking. It does have a tendency to overexpose though, and dynamic range is probably the biggest weakness. It's not terrible, but you definitely do get blown out highlights pretty frequently, even if you tap to expose the right place. Most of my photos never had any problems in the shadows, but highlights got blown out all the time. Of course, a natural way to fix this is to turn on HDR+, and I did that, it worked, and you can see before HDR, the highlights are blown out, and after HDR, you get your highlights back. So it works like it should. Once you get in low light, Nexus 6P photos start to show some grain, as you'd expect, but they stay surprisingly blur-free for something without optical image stabilization. And basically what it's doing here is cranking the ISO way up and keeping a relatively fast shutter speed to compensate for the lack of stabilization, and then relying on really heavy image processing to get rid of the noise from such a high ISO. You can see in these low light photos, some areas get really soft because of all the noise removal. Turns out, again, the best trick for all of this at night is to use HDR+ again. Takes a little bit slower, but the photo, once it processes, looks a lot better. Check it out. Regular shot, HDR+. Regular shot, HDR+. It's definitely, it works. It's keeping a more natural and lively tone for those low light shots and does better with noise. Overall, you can tell the camera in the Nexus 6P is really not bad. I think the area where it hurts the most from no OIS is in the 4K video, where those tiny little shakes from a handheld shot are normally smoothed out. Not so this time around, but outside of that, you can really tell Google's put a lot of work into the stock Google camera to make image processing better. Not overly sharp or overly processed, but pretty natural looking. And while there's no raw or manual modes with the new camera app, you can actually do that stuff with a third-party app. So at the end of the day, Nexus 6P checks a lot of boxes for me in terms of what I want in a phone. I've talked about how before there's basically no perfect smartphone, and there's still one or two or three things that I would have liked to have seen in this Nexus, but as far as Android phones go, this is my new favorite. This is easy a daily driver pick for me, and I really like using it. As far as recommending it goes, I think this is one of the easiest Nexus phones ever for me to recommend to someone to buy, especially with the much improved camera, the great battery life, and just an overall awesome experience throughout. Fast fingerprint reader, great display, and awesome performance throughout the clean, bloat-free stock Android. So if you're an Android enthusiast or a smartphone enthusiast, you're pretty much good to go. This is a smartphone that's not going to disappoint you at all in pretty much any way. And if you're just getting into smartphones or just getting into this budget of a smartphone, I still think it's going to be a great smartphone to buy, especially because you'll be right up at the front of the tier for new Android updates and new features and new things that come along with what Google tosses in. So yeah, highly recommended. Good stuff, Google. Thanks for watching this review, guys. If you enjoyed, feel free to hit that thumbs up button right below, and also hit that subscribe button below if you want to see more videos like this one. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.